Good morning, everyone, and Merry Christmas. I'm very honored to be speaking today with William J. Federer. William J. Federer, you can find him at American Minute. You can subscribe to his newsletter. His podcasts are available at AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com, and I'll include a link in the description below this video. His books are available in many places, but also conveniently on Amazon.com. You can find William J. Federer has an entire collection of videos on that of books on that site. Sorry, my phone just rang, sir. Pardon me. William J. Federer is a regular contributor on the Christian Broadcast Network, and he's appeared many times on C-SPAN as well. He's an American historian, a walking, talking textbook. We had him here in Rochester. He spoke for 3 hours and no one wanted to go home. And we look forward to having you again, sir, when the lockdown is finished. And we really want to have you back. There's so many people looking forward to seeing you and meeting you again. And they'll come back and hear you again. And I just want to say thanks for joining us on this Christmas session. Your book on Christmas is a fascinating read. It's available as an ebook, but I would suggest people purchase the print version because of the artwork. You will enjoy the full color artwork of saints and martyrs, artwork from classical antiquity that explains the meaning of Christmas back to its very earliest times, and and also an explanation of many Christmas carols. So I've already spoken too long. Pardon me, Mr. William J. Federer. Please tell us about Christmas traditions in America and around the world. Sir.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you. And the book that you mentioned is called There Really Is a Santa Claus. It's the history of St. Nicholas and Christmas holiday traditions. And it goes through all these different things. The, uh, the date we'll start off with, December 25th. It's interesting in the Gospel of Luke, it says John the Baptist's father, Zacharias, was in the temple. Uh, and then it has this one little line that he was of the course of Abijah. We don't really know what that means until you realize that King David had divided the Levites into 24 courses or 24 family groups. Each group took two turns taking care of the temple throughout the year, 6 months apart from each other, and it was a 1 week term. And we really didn't know when the course of Abijah was until a couple of things. One is the uh, Josephus mentions that when the Jerusalem was being destroyed by the Romans and the temple was being burned, it lists the name of the priests that were on duty when the temple was burnt, and what course they were. And they were the first one, the first family course. And it mentions the date, according to the Roman calendar, somewhere in end of July. But then we still didn't know the order. And so when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, it one of the items in the Dead Sea Scrolls was the sacerdotal system, and that was the listing of the order of the families of the courses. And the course of Abijah is the eighth one. And so if the first one was on duty when the temple was being burnt, the eighth one is the course of Abijah, and that would have been the end of September when they would have been on duty. Well, the end of September is when the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is celebrated. It's the holiest day in the Jewish year. And so if John the Baptist was in the temple the end of September and he went home and his wife Elizabeth conceived, the gospel clearly says that Elizabeth was in her 6th month of pregnancy when Mary conceived by the Holy Spirit and came to visit Elizabeth. So 6 months after the end of September would be the end of March. And so March 25th is the traditional date that Mary conceived by the Holy Spirit the baby Jesus. And so if March 25th is the date of the conception, then 9 months later would be December 25th. So there is a uh, legitimate, arguable uh, uh, support for December 25th being the date.
That's truly astonishing. That's actually the first time in my life I ever heard that clear explanation of why we celebrate in December on December 25th. There've been other the histories of you mentioned the Roman historian Josephus, uh, right? We can overlay the Roman calendar with the Jewish calendar and then determine these months. Pardon me for interrupting, but that's an excellent insight for me to have. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And some say, well, people say, well, it couldn't have been December because the sheep were in the field. Well, uh, two things. In Jerusalem, they had sheep in the field all year round because they had daily sacrifices. And number two, the climate of Jerusalem is like that of Dallas, Texas. And
Mhm.
so it's a,
Right.
but
It's an
any,
agrarian society, and they would have had flocks available all the time in the fields.
right. Now, the Jewish tradition was not to celebrate birthdays. Matter of fact, uh, in the Middle East and even into Asia, the tradition is not to celebrate birthdays. You every year, everyone's a year older, on January 1st. But we actually visited with someone from Turkey, and we asked them when their birthday was. They had to, take their wallet out of her purse and look at her, driver's license to tell us her birthday. She didn't
Hmm.
even have it memorized. Um,
Hmm.
so what happened was the early church was Jewish. It was Hebrew. And the most important date in the calendar was Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. Those are three feasts grouped together. And Jesus was crucified on Passover. He was in the grave on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Leaven was symbolic of sin, so Jesus took the sin out of the world. And Jesus rose from the dead on the Feast of First Fruits. Uh, and so those were the most important dates of the calendar. It was not until the Gentiles began converting to Christianity that the Gentile church had an interest in the birthday. So the Greeks were Gentile and they celebrated birthdays. The Hebrews did not. And so when a large amount of these Greeks and Romans and others converted, they're like, hey, when
Hmm.
was the birthday? So that was when there was this focus on it. Uh, but anyway, so that's the date. I wanted to throw in the story of Saint Nicholas. So uh, the Saint Nicholas is the most popular Greek saint. He is to the Greeks what Saint Peter is to Roman Catholics, what Saint Patrick is to the Irish. So there are more Greek churches named after Nicholas. And, a common name for Greek men is Nick, right? Nicholas.
Right.
And um, so St. Nicholas is like the founding father of the Greek Orthodox Church. For the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there were 10 major persecutions. Christians were thrown to the lions, and they held church out in the woods or in catacombs, caves under the ground that they had dug. And so it was during this time, Nicholas was born around 280 AD, and a movement swept through Christianity called Pietism, and that was or monasticism, and that was where if you really become a Christian, you should give away all your money and live in a cave as a hermit, or join a monastery, or in Egypt they would build platforms in the desert and climb on top and bake in the sun thinking that they were denying their flesh and getting holier. But it was all this me-focused salvation. It was such a thrill to realize that you could have a personal relationship with God, that it was this abandonment of the world and just the personal relation. And it sort of was this withdrawal from being involved. And so uh, the story is that Nicholas's parents were wealthy, and a plague swept through the area, and they died, and they left him with a lot of money. And he decided he was going to give away all the money and then go join a monastery in the Holy Land, the monastery of Zion. And but he wanted to give away the money anonymously, because he wanted the credit to go to God and not to him. And so he lived in a town called Patara, Asia Minor. Today, that's in Turkey. And he would sneak into town at nighttime and throw money in the window of poor people. Supposedly, it would land in a shoe or a stocking that was drying by the fireplace. Well, one famous story was a merchant in the town of Patara had gone bankrupt. And back then, the creditors would not only come and take your house and lands, they would take your children. And it would be sex trafficking, whatever, slavery. Unfortunately, this still goes on today. There's just a recent article in Nigeria where the Boko Haram Muslims kidnapped over 400 of the Christian school children. And so this idea of kidnapping children um, is a sad reality. But anyway, back in Asia Minor, this merchant, he had his three daughters. He knew if the creditors would come and take them, it would be a terrible life. But they were, I guess, in their teenage, early 20 years. And so this merchant thought if he could hurry up and marry his daughters off, the creditors couldn't take them. Unfortunately, the merchant did not have money for a dowry, which was needed in that area of the world for a legally recognized wedding. And so uh, Nicholas hears the problem late one night, throws the money in the window, provides the dowry. The oldest daughter can get married. And then later he sneaks into town, throws money in for the second daughter, and there's a big buzz talk of the town. She gets married. And when he's going to throw it in for the third, the dad is waiting up. And when he throws the money in, the dad runs outside and catches him. And Nicholas made the father promise not to tell where the money came from, because he wanted the glory to go to God and not to him. So that was the origin of the tradition of secret gift giving on the anniversary of Nicholas's death, which was December 6th of 343 AD. And so St. Nicholas Day is December 6th. And if you like, I can go ahead and explain what the Greeks had written down about St. Nicholas.
Yeah, please tell more, because this is fascinating. These are traditions in this book, and you're talking about Christmas traditions that we don't know the origins of these traditions anymore, and we don't know why we're celebrating the way we do. So this is tremendous information. Tell us what the Greeks said about Nicholas.
So there's lots of traditions the Greeks have. One is that he had gone over to the monastery of Zion and was about to make his vows to live the rest of his life in seclusion, but somehow the Lord told him not to hide his light under a bushel. And so he gets on a boat, goes back to what is today Turkey, but it was called Asia Minor back then, and gets off at a busy port town called Myra, Myra. And unbeknownst to him, the bishop had died. The church leaders could not decide who the next bishop was supposed to be. And one elderly church leader had a dream that the first person to church the next day would be named Nicholas, and he was to be their bishop. Well, Nicholas's habit was to fast all night and go to church, be the first one to church the next day. That was the habit where you would fast and then you would not break the fast till after church. And they would call it a break fast for breakfast. And anyway, so he's the first person in the church. The bishop or the elderly church leader asks him his name. When he says Nicholas, he says, "Follow me." Takes him to the back room where they're all fasting and praying. And when they break the news to him that he's supposed to be their bishop, he was not too excited because the Roman Emperor Diocletian was collecting bishops and killing them. So it was sort of like, you be the bishop. No, 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 you first. No, 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 you be the bishop. No. And he agrees. He is arrested. He's put in jail. He's awaiting death when the Emperor Diocletian is struck with an intestinal disease and abdicates the throne on May 1st, 305 AD. This was sort of interesting because the Roman emperors had been declaring themselves a god and demanding that their image be worshipped, and they would sprinkle gold dust in their hair. And so this was sort of like a god resigning. And anyway, so the next emperor is Galerius, and he continues persecuting Christians until he's struck with an intestinal disease and dies. And then it's a toss-up between four generals. Two are defeated, and it gets down to Constantine and Maxentius. And Constantine is marching toward Rome. And the day before the battle, he reportedly saw the sign of Christ in the sky and puts it on all of his shields and symbols, and he wins. The sign of Christ was the first two Greek letters of the name Christ. Like we abbreviate states with two letters, the Romans would abbreviate names, and the first letter of the Greek name Christ is written as an X. It makes the K sound, and it's called Chi. The second letter makes the sound, and it's written as a P, and it's called Rho. So it's the Chi Rho, the X and the P. You've probably seen that in Roman carvings. And so anyway, so Constantine, over the years, the Chi Rho got shortened just to the Chi, the X, and it was called the Christ's cross, and that's where you get Xmas. So X-MAS is not crossing out Christ, it's the Greek letter that stood for Christ.
Oh, okay.
And they would abbreviate XIANS, which was short for Christians. Anyway, it became a form of a written oath. So when you would swear to tell the truth on a document, you would sign at the Christ's cross. That's come down to us as sign at the X. And then they would, after they signed it, they would kiss it to show sincerity. And that's come down to us as the X's and the O's on the bottom of a Valentine. Or the cross my heart, swear to tell the truth. What's the cross my heart? That you're swearing before Christ that you're telling the truth. Anyway, so Constantine wins the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. He stops the persecution of Christians. Nicholas is let out of jail. And now that it's legal to be a Christian, he's preaching against paganism. And so nearby was the temple to Diana, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It had 127 enormous pillars and temple prostitutes. It was the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean. And so the Apostle Paul preached against Diana worship at Ephesus. And when Nicholas preached against it, it stirred the people up to the point where they tore the temple to Diana down. Also, the Romans had exposure of unwanted infants. It was their version of abortion. When the mother bore the child, she would lay it at the father's feet. If he picked it up and liked it and thought they could afford it, they would keep it. If not, the mother had to put the baby in a basket, set it out in the woods, and it would die. And all these, tearful pictures of the mother, saying goodbye to her baby. And of course, that's how Rome was founded. Two boys, Romulus and Remus, were abandoned in the woods, and supposedly a wolf came by and nursed them. And so that's the typical artwork of the founding of Rome. So when enough of the people became Christian in the Roman Empire, if a mother had to expose her child, she would put it in a basket in front of the door of an elderly Christian couple and knock on the door, and then they would come out and see the baby in the basket. Like those old stories of, the baby's left in it. Well, who does that? The Romans did. And so Nicholas preached against exposure of unwanted. And then there was a merchant in the town, a governor in that city who was corrupt. And the governor was going to execute some soldiers to cover up his corruption. I know it's hard for us to imagine that you could have a corrupt politician and then some people that are about to snitch on him are found dead. Um, but this was the situation. And so Nicholas hears about this, goes down to where the execution is about to take place, and breaks through the crowd, grabs the sword out of the executioner's hands, throws it down, and then turns and in front of everybody tells what corrupt stuff the governor had done. Now, the governor knew that nobody could know the details other than God. And so he realizes that his number's up and he begs Nicholas to pray that God would have mercy on him. The Greeks have other stories. Some are more believable than others, but one was there was a storm. The sailors and fishermen could not get back. Nicholas goes down and prays, and the sea becomes calm, and they're able to come back, sort of like when Jesus calmed the sea. Another story is the people were starving. He goes down to the port and talks some sailors into unloading some of their grain. They would take the grain from Egypt and North Africa over to Rome. Talked him into unloading some grain to feed his people and promised that God would bless them. And on their return trip, they said the grain that was left had multiplied in the hull of their ship and they had more than enough. Another story that's always associated with Nicholas is the Arian heresy. A guy named Arius was a bishop, and he said that Jesus was a created being. He was less than God, and he wrote a catchy song. And the Visigoths, who came into Rome, converted to Arianism. It's this church doctrinal division is not just splitting the church, but since Constantine had made the Christian church the de facto religion of the empire, now it's splitting Constantine's empire. And so he orders all the bishops to get together and settle it. And so Constantine pays for it. There's about 300 church leaders, and with all their assistants, about 1,500 people. And it's the first time that the church leaders get together in one place. And they come from all across the Roman Empire, and they meet in Nicaea, a city not too far from Myra. And the story is that Nicholas was so upset at Arius for starting this first major Christian heresy that Nicholas slapped Arius across the face on the floor of the conference. So jolly old St. Nick had a little temper. Better watch out, he's coming to town. And so it was just a Greek saint, and he was honored, and they would do the gift giving on the anniversary of his death, December 6th. But then in the 7th century, the Muslims began to invade the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Roman Empire. And they would destroy churches and graves and museums and libraries and artwork, sort of what they are doing today. And in the year 1087, they're getting close to destroying the grave and the church where St. Nicholas's remains are. The Emperor Justinian had built a cathedral there to honor Nicholas. So in the year 1087, they move his grave over to Italy, and a little town called Bari, Bari. And the Pope that dedicates the church is Urban II. Now, you may not be up on your Pope names, but that's the Pope that called for the First Crusade. All right, so you have Greeks fleeing, they're bringing over their relics and their artwork and their grave, the remains of St. Nicholas. And so now St. Nicholas' traditions are in Western Europe, and the gift giving catches on the anniversary of his death, December 6th. It catches on so much that St. Francis of Assisi in 1223 AD creates the creche scene, the nativity scene, saying all this gift giving is fine, but we need to get back to the real reason for the season. Jesus was born in the manger. Now, St. Francis and his Franciscans were so much against materialism that they dressed in burlap sacks, walked around barefoot, and vowed not to own any possessions, and they just preached the gospel and lived off of alms and donations. Then we go to the Reformation in 1517. Martin Luther, by this time, there's a saint's day for every day of the year, and um, the churches are filled full of relics and special things to remind people of the saints. And
Hmm.
uh, Martin Luther considered this a distraction from Jesus, and so he ended the saints' days and took all that out of the church and just left the cross. Um, and so the Germans really liked the St. Nicholas Day, and so that's when they Martin Luther moved the remains or moved the gift giving from uh, the date of December 6th to December 25th. And Martin Luther said all gifts come from the Christ child. And the German pronunciation of Christ child is Chris Kindle, like kindergarten, kindercare. Kind means child, and Chris Christ. So over the years, Chris Kindle got pronounced Chris Kringle. So Chris Kringle is really Chris Kindle, which means Christ child.
I always wondered where that came from. In terms of the etymology, the word histories, we're simply not taught that anymore. And let's mention the title of his book is There Really Is a Santa Claus. There Really Is a Santa Claus. And this is a book that it's beautiful enough on the download, the electronic form, but I really think this is a book that for explaining Christmas to your friends and your family, to other Christians. Maybe start a book group at your church, order multiple copies and have a book group and start teaching your community what the history of Christmas is. The artwork in the book is fantastic. And were you going to say something more on that topic of you finished with Chris Kringle and the word history of Chris Kringle, meaning Christ. Um,
Right. So then we go to England, 1534. Henry VIII brings the Reformation there, but not because he had a spiritual experience. He just wanted another wife. And so he went on to have six wives, and the Pope would not recognize his divorce. And so Henry VIII makes himself his own Pope, starts the Anglican Church, puts himself on as the head. But Henry VIII has he ends a lot of the saints' days and a lot of the Catholic uh, artwork and so forth. But instead of him focusing on Christ, uh, Henry brings back an old Roman holiday because Britain used to be a Roman colony, and the Roman holiday was Saturnalia. Now, Saturn was their god of feasting and plenty and merriment, and they celebrated it at the end of the year with gift giving and partying. If you saw the Christmas Carol with Charles Dickens, there's the spirit of Christmas present, and it's this big guy with robes on, a wreath in his hair, a goblet of wine, sort of the ho ho happy party guy. And you're looking at him, scratching your head, saying, "Who is this guy?" Sort of looks like Santa, also sort of looks like some Roman god. Well, it was Saturn, but they Christianized him and they called him Father Christmas. Right? They couldn't call him Saint Nicholas because saints were outlawed. So now he's a Christian version, and so during Henry VIII's time in England, Christmas became a party time, sort of like a Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras used to be a religious day. It was the day before Lent when you would fast 40 days before Easter. Now it's this lewd party in New Orleans. And so during Henry VIII's time in England, Christmas was, carousing, drinking, wassailing, where they would take a drink of booze and throw the rest of it on some plant, hoping for a nice harvest the next year. Uh, and so at this time, you had the Puritans. So when Henry VIII wanted to break from Rome, his advisors told him he needed to get rid of that Latin Bible, get himself an English Bible. The German princes have Martin Luther's German Bible that helped them to break away. He needs an English Bible. So he does. He gets this English Bible and he puts it in every church in England, dusts his hands, and says, "That's it, we broke from Rome." But something unexpected happened. People began to read it. and began to compare what's in the Bible to this king divorcing and beheading his church and being more worldly. And so a group starts that wants to purify the Church of England, and they're nicknamed the Puritans.
Puritans.
And the king doesn't think he needs purifying, so he persecutes them. And they have, bloody contests, and finally the Puritans win. And the Puritans are strict. They tore down William Shakespeare's Globe Theater because they said that theater was lewd. They forbade William Shakespeare from mentioning God in his lewd plays. And so that's when William Shakespeare began to write Midsummer's Night's Dream and these little fairies and everything, because he wanted something supernatural in his plays. And since he couldn't refer to God, because they considered it taking God's name in vain and casting pearls before swine to do that. So William Shakespeare wanted to refer to something that was supernatural. So he began to write these plays with fairies and so forth. But the Puritans outlawed Christmas. And they said, can God be honored by mad mirth and hard drinking and partying fit for a Bacchus or a Mohammedan Ramadan, And so this is when the Puritans settled America. And when you read the Pilgrim story, the second boatload of pilgrims, the first ones came over, and the captain of the Mayflower writes in his log, at harbor in Plymouth Christmas Day, but not observed by these colonists, they being opposed to all saints' days, etc. A large party went ashore and felled timber and built their first building. Well, a second boatload of pilgrims comes over later, and they wanted to celebrate Christmas. And so William Bradford says that, every day is the same, and the holy day is the Sabbath, right? And, but the pilgrims were into conscience, that you should be persuaded to believe and act, not do something because you're forced by a government. We're facing that challenge today. We have a government that wants to force people's consciences. But so William Bradford said that everyone was going to work in the field, but because your conscience is not yet persuaded, you can stay here in town and celebrate Christmas. Well, they come back at lunchtime and they find them playing in the street, stool ball and whatever the different type of games are. And William Bradford says it may offend your conscience to work on Christmas, but it offends my conscience when we're working and you're playing. So if you're going to observe Christmas, do it quietly in your homes. Anyway, and so that was the Pilgrims, and then the Puritans came over. The Puritans had a 5-shilling fine for anybody caught celebrating Christmas. And so it was not until the Dutch settled New Amsterdam, and the Dutch did bring over their Christmas traditions, their St. Nicholas traditions. The Dutch loved Christmas. The Dutch loved St. Nicholas. Because of Nicholas calming the sea, he was considered the patron saint of sailors. A little trivia, because he threw 3 bags of gold in the window for those 3 girls to have dowries, he became the patron saint of pawnbrokers. Seriously, you can look it up. And the pawnbrokers will hang 3 gold balls outside of their store to symbolize the 3 bags of gold that Nicholas threw in the window.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the Dutch were sailors, and they had the largest merchant empire for about 200 years. They had an island off the coast of Japan. They had Jakarta, Indonesia. They had Goa, India. They had South Africa. They had, New Amsterdam, which became New York. And so the Dutch were sailors, so they liked St. Nicholas because he was the patron saint of sailors. And so the Dutch settled in New Amsterdam, and they brought their St. Nicholas traditions over. Now, a little rabbit trail here. You know how the Catholic saying is that St. Peter's at the gates of heaven? Well, the Greeks do a take on the book of Revelation, where Jesus will return at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead, riding a white horse. And the saints will come back with him, riding white horses. And St. Nicholas is a saint, and he'll be one of those riding a white horse. But he's so special, he gets to come back once a year for a little mini judgment, a little checkup on the kids, make sure they're on the right track, see who's naughty, see who's nice. And he would come uh, from the celestial city, heaven, the New Jerusalem. Well, that turns into the North Pole. Uh, in Norway, they didn't have horses, so he's riding a reindeer. And the angels turn into the elves, and the Lamb's Book of Life and Book of Works turns into the Book of the Naughty and the Nice. And so you can see where it sort of gets off. We don't view him as a Christian figure, but whenever a large number of Muslim immigrants come into a neighborhood, they still view him as a Christian saint, and they get offended by him, and they want to outlaw him.
So we had a local strip mall here in my neighborhood across the street. They were told to by Muslim community to remove all their Christmas decorations from their store, or there would be consequences and they would lose their business. And that strip mall stopped from that day forth doing Christmas decorations. I'm happy to say in our neighborhood, we're bringing it back this Christmas. And uh, last year, I sent a note around the neighborhood saying, can we start bringing back Christmas? Can we start decorating a little bit more in our neighborhood? And we're really seeing a expression of that a lot more. Just people are stepping it up. And I wanted to ask you about this St. Nicholas tradition or Santa Claus when you said the yearly checkup, who's naughty and nice. Is there an origin to that lump of coal? Does the lump of coal that the naughty kids would have stuck in their stocking have something to do with this tradition? I don't know if maybe I stumped you there. Somehow I
No,
doubt
no,
it.
each country adds its own little flavor, and so it's sort of this tradition that is sort of a group of all of Western civilization gets to put in a little bit. So in some countries, Saint Nicholas had now. By the way, the Dutch pronounced Saint Nicholas Sant Niklaus. Sant Nicholas, right? Saint Nicholas, but Sant Niklaus, and you say that a couple times, you come up with Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So Santa Claus is basically the Dutch pronunciation of Saint Nicholas.
Oh.
But in Germany, they have Santa Claus has a little helper named Krampus, and he's sort of a mischievous guy, and he would give coal. Other places they'd give switches, like you're going to get whipped. But in Holland, Saint Nicholas has a helper named Zwarte Piet, Black Peter, and he's a Muslim. And the Muslims controlled Spain for 700 years and carried away over 1 million Europeans into slavery. And there were whole Catholic orders throughout the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians, and the head of the order was called the ransomer. And they would collect alms and donations at church services to ransom back your friend who was captured by these Muslims and sold into slavery. And so they tell the little Dutch kids, if you're good, you get a present. If you're naughty, Zwarte Piet will put you in a gunny sack, take you back to Spain, and sell you into Muslim slavery. Because the Muslims had controlled Spain for 700 years and sold lots of people into slavery. And so,
Yeah. It's a little known fact there were more European slaves in Africa than there were ever African slaves in the New World. But the slave trade of Europeans into Africa was a massive operation
yeah,
undertaken by Islam. Yeah.
yeah, they enslaved lots of Europeans and then also lots and lots of Africans. Muhammad was a white Arab. And but anyway,
Parts of-
and so it would strike fear into these little Dutch kids if you told them that Sinterklaas is coming. Instead of them being, oh, I'm going to get a present, it would be, oh, I might be sold into slavery. And so I was doing a call-in radio show one time, and a guy called in. He goes, yeah, I grew up in Holland, and all of the little boys in our neighborhood, the night before St. Nicholas would visit, we would all go to sleep with pocket knives in our pockets. And I said, why is that? He goes, that's to cut ourselves out of the gunny sack in case Svarte Pete took us, right? And,
It's an
so
amazing Christmas tradition. That's
yeah. So now we
fascinating.
have the Dutch settled New York, and in 1624, and they rule it for 40 years, and they had a church, and their church was the St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church, right there in New York. The first Dutch Reformed Church in New Amsterdam, New York, was the St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church. And but then we go to Washington Irving in New York. He wrote Rip Van Winkle, Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He would tell history stories and embellish them, sort of like John Bunyan and the Blue Ox, and, so Washington Irving writes. He's the one that gave us the name Gotham, which is a Dutch name, right? Gotham City. But Dietrich Washington Irving wrote Dietrich Knickerbocker's History of New York from the beginning to the end of the Dutch dynasty. And, Knickerbocker was a made-up name, but it became so popular that now you have the New York Knicks. Um, but
Can I ask you a question Uh, about? Sorry, I skipped your record again. I shouldn't have. I mean, I shouldn't have interrupted. I At some point, let's talk a little bit about the Christmas carols before we lose too much time, because the Christmas carols, I mean, those are a tradition for me that are really meaningful in to me personally. And your book focuses a lot on the Christmas carols. So, in a moment, perhaps when you finish this chapter of the discussion, these ideas, can we move toward the discussion of Christmas carols a little bit?
sure, yeah. So anyway, so
Yeah.
Washington Irving describes Saint Nicholas, but he's dressed in a Dutch outfit of long trunk hose, a hat, leather belt, and boots. And then you have Clement Moore writes his poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. So it was night before Christmas, all through the house, not a creature stirring, not even a mouse. Stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hope that St. Nicholas would soon be there. So he's still St. Nicholas, he just shrunk in size. Then you have Civil War, Thomas Nast, the one who gave us the Republican elephant, Democrat mule. He's the one that put a North Pole sign behind Nicholas, who was addressing the Union troops. So the North Pole sign was a political jab at the South during the Civil War to say St. Nicholas belongs to the North. Anyway, and then you
Oh,
have Haddon Sundblom. He's an artist that did the Quaker Oats Man and Aunt Jemima syrup. And Haddon Sundblom is the one who was hired by Coca-Cola to do a painting of St. Nicholas drinking Coke, and he did one every year for 30 years. And since Coca-Cola pioneered mass marketing, that's the image that spread around the world. But there really was a guy way back in the third century who named Nicholas, who became a Christian, went into the ministry. He confronted corrupt leaders. He confronted sexual immorality and stood up for the Trinity. But he's most known for being generous and helping out poor people in their time of need anonymously. And so that in itself is worth remembering. Um, Now, in Western Europe, December 25th was the holiest day. Christmas, Eastern Europe, it was January 6th, the visit of the wise men. They couldn't decide which day was holier. So, in the consulate tours in 567 AD, they decided to make all 12 days from December 25th to January 6th, the 12 days of Christmas. And they called them holy days, which we pronounce today holiday.
huh.
And anyway, the Christmas carols, you have Isaac Watts writes Joy to the World. You have Charles Wesley, who is the brother of John Wesley. He was the secretary to George Oglethorpe, James Oglethorpe, that founded Georgia. But Charles Wesley and his brother start the Methodist revival movement, and Charles Wesley writes 6,000 hymns, and one of them is Hark the Herald Angels Sing. You have a German Catholic church in Austria. And the story is that they had their big organ, their big Christmas thing, and everybody files into the church. And a mouse had eaten a hole in the bellows, which were those big pumps that pump the air through the organ. So the organ didn't work. and they quickly got their music minister, and he wrote a quick song to play on the guitar. And so in this huge cathedral, it's everybody's quiet. Instead of the organ and everything, it's just silent. And they sing Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night. And it became one of the most popular Christmas songs. And even in 1914, there's the Christmas truce when first year World War I started, and you had the trench warfare with the Germans and the Belgium and the French and the English. And this is several years before America gets involved in the war. And it's Christmas Eve, and they start singing Silent Night. And all the different sides are singing it. And then somebody puts up a white flag, somebody else on the other side puts up, and they have their two commanders. They get up, they walk to the middle of the field, they shake hands, and they agree to stop fighting for the Christmas day. And so they get together, they play soccer together. They're trimming each other's hair, they're snipping off buttons and trading them as like souvenirs. And they show them newspapers because the Germans thought that the Germans had taken London, and they show them a newspaper. No, 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 the Germans are not in London. And then when the next day, the generals found out about it, and they were furious that they were fraternizing with the enemy, and so they ordered the fighting to restart. Oh, that was sad, but that's the 1914 cruise. But yeah, you have. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, written during the Civil War. Several of them were written during the Civil War, and it's just fascinating. But again, the details of those are in this book. There really is a Santa Claus: the history of Saint Nicholas and Christmas holiday traditions.
In the book, there really is a Santa Claus. You speak about the 12 days of Christmas, and you've just explained for us the meaning of the 12 days running from December 24th into January 6th. And the song, The 12 Days of Christmas, you say it's possibly inspired by the 1625 song titled In Those 12 Days, where a meaning was assigned to each day. Now, I've heard this song and I hear it every year, and I love this song, but I never knew there was a poetic symbolic meaning for each of the 12 days of Christmas, from 12 drummers drumming on down to and a partridge in a pear tree. And your book explains my true love in the song is God himself, which of course would explain the church is the bride of Christ in a way, right? And 12 drummers are the 12 points in the Apostles' Creed, down to the pear tree being the cross and the tree of Adam's fall. Everything in between is explained in the book. There really is a Santa Claus. Um, can you talk a little bit, perhaps, about that, and then the Christmas Carol, "I saw three ships come sailing in on Christmas Day"? Because that's a mystery to me. Your
Yeah,
book covers that one as well.
right. So Cologne, Germany. The story is that the remains of the three wise men was discovered in the Far East, and that they put them on a ship and they sailed up the river to Cologne, Germany. And so the big, huge cathedral in Cologne, Germany was where they had the three boxes of the remains of the three wise men. And that's what made it a pilgrimage stop. So everybody wanted to go to Cologne, and that's where they got the money to build that enormous cathedral that's still there to this day. They've had to put big barricade things in front so that the Muslim immigrants wouldn't destroy it. But anyway, but uh, the 12 days of Christmas. So as you mentioned, in 1625, it was like a Sunday school song for kids where you would associate, but the song in those 12 days is a real song. It does date to 1625. Now, for those not familiar, you had the Reformation taking place in 1517, but then you had religious wars And the thought is that a lot of people were illiterate, and so you use the stained glass windows in the church to tell the stories of the church stories. But it says, "What are they which are but one? We have one God alone. What are they which are but two? Two testaments old and new. What are they which are but three? The three persons of the Trinity. What are they but are but four? The four evangelists there are. What are they but are but five? They are that which are the five senses." That's what it says there. Anyway, the eight
Or the
beatitudes, and
first
goes,
5 books, the Pentateuch, or the
yeah,
5 golden rings later.
yeah. And so that's the song uh, in those 12 days. So we do have the song uh, that has something for every single day of the year, and it's repetitive. And so the the connection is that that inspired the 12 days of Christmas song, and that each of the 12 days is similar in that there is a spiritual meaning with those. And you know
It,
like you
poetic.
mentioned, the five five golden rings would be the let's see here, uh the
The
um
Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible.
yeah,
And
so two turtle doves would be the Old Testament, Old and New. Three French hens, faith, hope, and love. Four calling birds, four gospels. Five golden rings, the Pentateuch. Six geese laying, 6 days of creation. Seven swans assuming, seven gifts of the Spirit. Eight beatitudes. Nine fruits of the Holy Spirit. The 10 commandments. The 11 faithful apostles, and then the 12 points of the Apostles' Creed. Um,
you poetically, that's fascinating. This is the first time in my life I'm hearing the explanation, and I've been hearing that song this Christmas season, and just wondering what the imagery of it is, and the poetic imagery really works because the 6 geese a laying an egg is a productive and creative activity. So corresponding that to the 6 days of creation works as a poetic image. Or 7 swans a swimming, referring to the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. That a swan is moving gently through the water and having
like
gifts of the
yeah.
Holy Spirit would be a very, or maids a milking, 8 maids a milking corresponds to something beautiful and gentle. So you have the 8 beatitudes. The Lord's a leaping, with the 10 commandments, could be rule givers. Lords would be like a political office, or lords would be sort of rulers over a district. So that could be 10 commandments. The piper's piping works as a poetic imagery for 11 faithful apostles, because pipers piping are sending out a sound that can be heard at a great distance. And it's something that will summon people and they'll hear it. So 11 faithful apostles. And then 12 drummers really works as the 12 points in the Apostles' Creed as a poetic image for that, because when you drum, you are setting a rhythm and a pattern, and a creed would give you something more to march by, so to speak. This explanation in your book, there really is a Santa Claus. This is really given me insights into a Christmas carol that I've been singing since I was very, very young. Every year. Had no idea what it meant.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I've got to run
Yeah.
here,
Yes,
but
sir.
but it is in the book. There really is a Santa Claus. The history of Saint Nicholas and Christmas holiday traditions has all the transitions of how the things have changed, and you get to decide what you want to keep, what you want to throw out. But it's a fascinating book, and again, my website is AmericanMinute.com.
And remember,
Jay.
William J. Federer's books can be found on Amazon.com. And especially check out his website, AmericanMinds.com,
American Minute.
AmericanMinute.com. We'll include a link in the description below. And thank you very much for this fascinating explanation of the history of Christmas, sir.
Well, thank
Oh,
you, and
insightful.
appreciate all you're doing, and look forward to the next time.
Hopefully see you after the lockdowns over here in Minnesota when we can have you again. Thank you
All
so much.
right. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.